Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is None of Your Business, aka Bizcoon, and today we are going to be reacting to Geography Now, a video entitled "The UK Just Handed the Chagos Islands to Mauritius." For those that don't know, this is Paul Barbado, I think that's his name, otherwise known as Barbs. And he's run this channel, Geography Now, for quite a long time now. And it was only just recently, within the past, I don't remember how long ago it was, but he finally managed to get through every single UN-recognized sovereign state from A to Z, from... I don't even remember what the first country he did. I can't think of it off the top of my head, because it's all in alphabetical order, and there's over 190 or so countries in the world, so that's besides the point. But I don't really know anything about the Chagos Islands, but I do know about Mauritius. I believe it's off the coast of East Africa, north of Madagascar. And I don't really know anything about this, but it's not often that we have territorial exchanges that are mutual. A lot of the time, it's very contested when it comes to these types of things, and I'm curious to see where this goes. But before we get started, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and be sure to watch Paul's video first before watching mine so that you guys can show him some support. I am simply just providing commentary. But without further ado, let's see just how big of a deal this is.
Imagine, if you will, growing up, your parents tell you stories of this amazing, beautiful, picturesque, serene area with a cool ocean breeze on sandy beaches. Just off in the distance is a coconut plantation. Your home is in a village with a few other houses and a small church and a school nearby. The island is on a lagoon. Off in the horizon, you see the small other neighboring islands. And this is a place both you and your parents have never seen. Only Grandpa and Grandma have seen it in their youth, and they are getting older in their small flat in the town of Crawley, just south of London. And you are told your whole life that you have to find a way to return back to this place you've never seen. This is the story of the Chagos Archipelago.
Okay.
And something just happened here. Let's have a geography talk.
Let's go.
Hey, Geography peeps, I'm your host, Barbs, and oh my gosh, golly, Queen Latifah on a pogo stick. What am I wearing? I'm wearing a Geography Now
Here we go.
which is fourth you can get at Geography.
Which is fourth. Got all those contractions. And the thing is, according to Peggy Hill's mom, you do not use contractions in this house.
Now.com. On the website, we have a myriad of different merch options, such as t-shirts. We also got mugs and drawstring bags. You might bump into somebody wearing it in public, and you'll be like, hey, you watch Geography Now? Yeah, me too. What's your favorite episode? The one where he promotes his merch. Done. Anyway, that being said,
It's not selling out if it's your brand.
let's move on to the topic of the show. So after 10 years of doing Geography Now, one thing I learned is
10
that
years.
every area of the world...
Yeah, he's been... Afghanistan was the first one, and the last one, I think, is Zimbabwe, unless there's some other country that's spelled Z-O that I'm forgetting. Well, yeah, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe.
World has kind of like a crazy, twisted origin backstory. And knowing about these backstories kind of helps you understand why and how things are the way they are in this world. I'm gonna be honest, in 7th grade, I failed history class just because my teacher was so boring and I never did the homework. I hated homework so much.
Yeah. Between you and me, I stopped doing my homework after 7th grade, and I still passed all my classes.
I would just pass the test because I memorized everything, but like, I don't understand.
Literally me. That's literally what happened to me. I pass all my tests, but when it comes to homework, yeah, it's a lot to be desired.
Homework. Like, why would you give a kid more school after school? That's like just extra torture. Just like, let the kid have fun and be... And this is a different topic. Let's not even get into this.
Yeah, let's stay on topic.
Anyway, history has never been my strong suit growing up, but doing...
Yeah, history has always been my well, actually, math and science were my strong suits growing up. Reading and writing, especially reading, were not. Long story short, the 5th grade ruined reading for me, so that I really don't want to get into right now.
In Geography Now, I realized, just like math with science, history and geography go hand in hand. You cannot do one without the other.
Right.
It kind of really taught me to see the world as if it's kind of like a big chess game, you know? Every country or ethnic group is kind of like a piece on the chessboard, and every move you make could have dire consequences or successes if you don't pay attention to everything happening on the board all at once.
Right.
That's kind of how the world works. And the Chagos Archipelago is a very strange chess piece. It's caught in a soap opera that involves 2 empires, 1 country, and 1 dependency, and a whole community of people that are fighting for something they've never even seen. And let me tell you something. Originally, I wanted to make this video into just a YouTube short, but then the more I dived into the information on this topic, I realized I I have to make a geography talk. So here's
No
the deal.
shit.
Because this incident of sovereignty transfer happened relatively recently, I had to use a lot of recent news articles to do proper research. And that's why I really want to thank Ground News. They're actually helping me make this episode.
Oh, here we go. Yep, here's the Ground News sponsor. Hopefully one day I'll get a Ground News sponsor. But until then, let us continue on from here.
So that being said, let's explain what the hell even is the Chagos Archipelago. Some of you may not have even heard of it. First of all, the Chagos Archipelago is a collection of about 60 or so flat, small islands.
Okay, it's a lot further away from East Africa than I thought. It's a lot closer to India.
Clustered in about 10 or so skinny atoll lagoons just south of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. From the 60s all the way up to 2025, these islands were considered a British territory labeled as the British Indian Ocean Territory.
Oh, okay. I read that a little bit ago and I was like, oh, it's the British Indian Ocean Territory?
Of all the islands within the territory, only one of them is inhabited by a seasonally rotating crew of military personnel on the island of Diego Garcia, which hosts a joint US-UK military base. And this military base is the focal point of all the discussions concerning the area. But it's not where everything begins. First, we have to explain the history of the Chagos Archipelago.
Okay.
I know I hate history, but I have to do it. So,
Well, I kind of like history, so I would like for you to do it.
pre-colonial times, Indian and Arab sailors may have passed by these uninhabited islands, but they were so far and small and resource deprived that they never really cared to inhabit or claim them, so they left them alone and empty. Fast forward, this explorer, Diego Garcia, working under the Portuguese, saw them and then named some of them, like the main one, after his own self. But they still didn't bother to claim or inhabit them either. Fast forward again, the French passed by and were like, okay, yeah, if no one claims it or wants it, yoink. And at this point, the French already had another colony, Mauritius, which they called Ile-de-France, which was also inhabited upon discovery. You know the dodo bird? This is the island of the dodo bird, you know, the one that went extinct, this Mauritius. It was a French overseas territory. So as the technical first peoples to claim the islands, they decided to connect the Chagos Archipelago as a dependency of Mauritius. During this time, the French brought in people that were enslaved either from Africa and then later indentured servants from India, what is now Pondicherry, to the Chagos Islands, along with some French administrators. They created a whole new French Creole culture and language. They all mixed up and made babies, and bam, these are the original Chagosian
Oh, so basically Haiti.
peoples. During this time, they inhabited and built infrastructure on 3 of the atolls of the Chagos Archipelago: Perros Baños, Solomon, and Diego Garcia. And now here's the thing. During this time, Napoleon was in power. And after Napoleon fell and he was exiled to that random-ass island in the Atlantic, the British pretty much...
Yep. Where he wrote something in a journal, and he accurately described the future of Europe, including what would happen in World War I due to all of the stuff that he'd been up to. Like, yeah, Napoleon's influence on Europe was pretty big. So much so that even Napoleon himself recognized it and kind of accurately predicted World War I.
assumed control over many French possessions, including this one, and then bam, they became British, which is why today Mauritius is like bilingual between French and English. When the British brought even more indentured servants from India and even Malaysia and other parts of the world, and then the Chagosians made even more babies, and bam, now the Chagosians are a genetic admixture of possibly 3 continents. They're very mixed people.
Nice.
And here's the thing, all this
That sounds like Latin America.
time, throughout both iterations of the French and British empires, the Chagos Archipelago was always a dependency of Mauritius. And then fast forward the 20th century, various European powers start relinquishing their hold over African colonies, and then new nations gain independence, including Mauritius. But here's the thing, when Mauritius gained independence, the UK decided to negotiate about the detachment of the Chagos Archipelago from the sovereignty of Mauritius, and they would make it into a new territory called the British Indian Ocean Territory. Not a very
The British Indian Ocean Territory. That was, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
original clever name, but whatever it is. I mean, it makes sense, but come on, could have called it something else. I don't know. Why? Because during Cold War time,
No, that reminds me of the various provinces and territories of Australia. Yeah, you have East Australia, and I actually don't remember all of them. But then there's New South Wales. They couldn't just call it New Wales. They had to call it New South Wales because apparently it's that important.
the UK decided it might be wise to build a military base on Diego Garcia and lease it out to the US for 50 years plus a possible 20-year extension, starting in 1966. So if the whole lease had gone through its entirety, it would have ended in 2036. And that's when the 1965 Lancaster House Agreement was put into play. When Mauritius was gaining independence, both sides decided to set their terms for what would follow in this independence. Some say that the Mauritius side was kind of reluctant when they signed it because there was a lot of pressure put on them, and it wasn't a formal treaty ratified by the parliament, but rather just an administrative agreement, which is a very important key factor that Mauritius brings up in these debates. Anyway, what was the agreement? Well, according to declassified UK government records, upon signing, Mauritius got £3 million in compensation, continued fishing rights and use of copra plantations, support for Mauritius's independence in the UN, and in both verbal and written formats, the UK promised that the Chagos Archipelago would be returned to Mauritius when it was perceived that there would no longer be a need for defense and the lease of the USA was up. They also gave implicit assurances of security support, but there was no formal military treaty. With the signing of this agreement, it meant that now the Chagos Archipelago would be considered restricted military land. Erith goeth. Now it meant that the UK would have to start evicting and resettling peoples that were not military personnel on the island, aka the Chagosian peoples that had historically historically been living there for over 2.5 centuries. For about 6 years between 1967 to 73.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's... Yeah.
About 2,000 Chagosians were resettled mostly in what is now Mauritius, Seychelles, and the UK. They were given ex gratia, I hate pronouncing it the American way, ex gratia
Yes, ex gratia.
resettlement funds to help them resettle in these new locations. Today, the Chagosian people say that those resettlement funds were not only, completely inadequate, but it was also completely illegal to resettle them at all to begin with. And they demand to return back to the islands that they had inhabited. And this has been
Yeah, I can imagine.
the plight of the Chagosian peoples for over 50
Yeah. I was going to make a comment about what's going on in South Africa, but I think that's best saved for another video.
years. And the funny thing is, while all of that was happening with the Chagosians, Mauritius also kept arguing that the Lancaster House Agreement was not legitimate, and so therefore the Chagos Archipelago should rightfully be returned back to them. So it's like you have two historically tied entities, the Chagosian peoples and the entire country of Mauritius, that are both vying for some kind of like reclaiming settlement of the Chagos Archipelago in some regard, independently of each other. So it's like there's three key players in this whole equation. And this is where the argument gets really nuanced. Because unlike what you have in Africa, or at least mainland continental Africa, what you have here are two islands that started out as uninhabited and then became inhabited through colonial years and then brought in various ethnic groups from all over the world and then became a whole new thing. Like
Yeah, that's actually something that happened with, what was it? I think that happened in other island nations off the coast of Eastern Africa. Like there was the island that Napoleon was banished to. I think that was uninhabited until it was discovered later. And then there are several other islands in other parts of the world that had no people living on them, but then they started being inhabited by mostly Europeans, but some others as well.
it's one thing to like make negotiations and demands when you have like an ethnic group that has deep ancient historical ties to a plot of land, but the weird nuanced factor to this scenario is that technically nobody's really indigenous. Everybody was brought in only a few centuries ago. So then like what do? Do you go by like the first people that were there, which were like the French, or do you go by like the last group of people that managed it? Like, it's like there is no easy way to make a definitive rule on how to manage these types of scenarios. It's a weird demographically tricky situation that all parties involved in this debate have to kind of consider. Anyway, these arguments went on for about 3 decades, and it wasn't until the year 2000 when something happened
And the suffrage! They have suffered enough. The women have suffered enough. We need to end their suffrage right now.
everything started kicking off. What happened? The Chagosian issue was brought up to the UK High Court, and surprisingly, they actually ruled that it was unlawful for them to evict the Chagosian people. However, shortly after that,
There's always an exception to these rules, isn't there? Just as there's always a catch to these utopias. Like being forced into a matchmaking thing.
orders in council override the decision to resettle the Chagosian people back in the Chagos Archipelago. Nonetheless, this was the first move made in about 3 decades that started the conversation about the Chagosians. And when this happened, Mauritius jumped in immediately. And that's when everything started happening. I'm just going to quickly go over the timeline of everything that kind of happened and put pressure for this whole thing to even happen up until today. So about a decade after this whole ruling thing, the UK decided to try and make the Chagos Archipelago a marine protected area. Now, on paper and on the surface, that sounds good. You know, we're protecting the environment. Well, many claim it was a strategic move to block the resettlement of Chagos Islanders. And then later, the UN tribunal declared that this was a violation of international law. Fast forward 2013, the UN General Assembly votes a majority to support Mauritius' claim to sovereignty over the Chagos. Fast forward 2017, the International Court of Justice gets involved, and they give an advisory opinion for the UK to stop their administration over the Chagos Archipelago as soon as possible. Here's the thing, the International Court of Justice is kind of like they always do that. It's like, here's our advisory opinion.
Yeah, pretty much what happened with the whole situation south of Lebanon, let's call it.
At the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, that's not really like a prosecution or ruling. It's just your opinion, so thank you, but no. Then in 2021, the UN General Assembly voted for a 6-month deadline for the UK to possibly withdraw from the Chagos. It was supported by the UN International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. And then in August of that exact same year, the International Post Union decided to ban stamps from the British Indian Ocean Territory.
Oh lord, that's so petty.
In 2021, Mauritius amended their Criminal Code Act of Section 76B, which basically criminalized anybody who misrepresented Mauritius' sovereignty, including over the Chagos Archipelago. This includes distributing things like
Bro, this is crazy, damn.
coins or stamps or official maps and documents that did not claim the Chagos under Mauritius. Then finally, in 2021, just as the pandemic begins, the UK announces that they will begin talks on the sovereignty transfer of the Chagos Archipelago.
We begin the talks. The actual transfer hasn't even begun. We're just talking about a potential transfer that may or may not happen that'll take 3 years to accomplish.
When Mauritius heard this, they were ecstatic. And they even sent over a small crew of people to the Perros Baños and the Salomon Atolls to symbolically raise the Mauritian flag. And in 2022, British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly announced the beginning of negotiations moving forward with this ordeal. In that same year, in 2022, a BBC report documented the return of a few Chagosian peoples via the Mauritian government with a
Yep, kissing the land that their not so distant ancestors resided on. They had only been living on those islands for like 200 years, but damn it, they're gonna make the most of those 200 years. Pretty much the United States and other or countries in the Americas in a nutshell.
Military escort to see the islands for the first time. This was a groundbreaking moment. And then finally, on May 22nd of 2025, Prime Minister Keir Starmer signed a formal agreement on the transfer of sovereignty of the Chagos archipelago to Mauritius. However, it came
Of course there's a catch.
with some heavy caveats.
Shit.
As per the 2025 negotiations, the deal included a new 99-year lease of the military base to the UK from Mauritius. So now it wouldn't be a UK lease to the US, it would be a Mauritius lease to the UK.
Is the UK still leasing it to the US, though?
According to the documents, Mauritius will receive an annual rent of £165 million for the first 3 years, followed by £120 million annually for the subsequent 10 years. Thereafter, the £120 million annual payment will be adjusted for inflation. In addition, this agreement also has a £40 million trust fund set aside for the possible resettlement of Chagosians on any island except Diego Garcia. They can go anywhere except the military base island. Under Article 6 of the agreement, Mauritius is granted authority to implement a program of resettlement for Chagosians. Any such resettlement must conform to the terms of the agreement and the laws of Mauritius. Now here's the thing. This provision offers a possibility, but not a mandate of resettlement. This leaves the decision and implementation details all within the discretion of the Mauritius government. And this is where the path gets a little bumpy in regards to the agreements, because during the process of all these negotiations, nobody from the Chagosian community was really involved in any of the decision-making process.
Of course. Yeah, you have this group of people that want something, and these people want to go back to the place that they came from, yet they didn't exactly have a say in the whole ordeal.
Everything in regards to possible Chagosian resettlement is now held in the jurisdiction of Mauritius. They have that whole trust fund set apart for it. Now the issue is, can they trust Mauritius? Can they handle the situation? What will they do? What will happen? And if they cannot resettle Diego Garcia, it's most likely that they're going to try to resettle the other 2 islands. But the thing is, those 2 islands are completely undeveloped and haven't been inhabited for over half a century. There is no infrastructure. So it would take a lot of resources to ship in all the materials to completely rebuild an entire settlement completely from scratch and keep them functioning for a new society. And the other question is, how many Chagosians would even be willing to resettle on those 2 islands? Today, it's estimated that there's just a little bit over 10,000 Chagosian peoples now.
Not too many, so would it even be worth it for all of them to just resettle? I'm sure there's plenty of them that would love to just go back there, but they're gonna have to put in the work, all things considered.
Descended from the original 2000, how many of them would be willing to go back to those islands, which would play into how much they have to pay into resettling all of the new Chagosians, if they even do. And you know what's really crazy? If the UK had just let the Chagosians keep living their lives on the islands while they were building the new military base, of course, yeah, maybe they would have to displace the ones on Diego Garcia to the other islands, but if they had just let the Chagosians live on the Chagos Islands originally in the 60s when they were building the military base, would any of this have even happened? Because the Chagosian dispute is such a cornerstone to this whole debate. Like, yes, Mauritius could still claim the Chagos archipelago for themselves, but if the actual Chagosian peoples were still happily living there, inhabiting their islands under the UK sovereignty, then Mauritius wouldn't have as much leverage over the UK. It's kind of like the plight or complacency of a small group of people can be weaponized so easily for one larger entity's loss or gain.
Yeah, that's pretty much like divide and conquer, isn't it?
Isn't that crazy how that happens in this world sometimes? Maybe just some food for thought. Anyway, that's my video. Hope you guys learned something about the whole situation with the Chagos archipelago. What topic do you think I should do a Geography talk on next? Let me know in the comments. I do actually read your comments for like the first hour and then I get bored because there's too many of them. But
I can't wait for that to happen.
I do like reading the good ones, so if you have a good comment, I probably will read it.
The good ones. No, if I get bad comments, I'll just say, sounds to me that you're hating on me because I'm stacking paper to the ceiling and you probably ain't got shit.
I'll consider it. So yeah, until then, thank you for watching. Stay cool, stay tuned. Get a Geography Now shirt at geographynow.com. All right, cheers.
Yep, it's not selling out if it's your brand. That was a fun video, definitely very informative. Like I knew what the British Indian Ocean territory was and I knew what Mauritius was, but I didn't realize that there was this whole thing that was going on. So it's interesting to know, like, even to this day, there are some things that you're always learning. They learn something new every day, and I guess this is one of those many things. It always seems like I'm learning a lot of things every day. But regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, not just to me, but to Paul here. And yeah, he covered every single UN-recognized country, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, and it was quite a ride for all those years. I've been with Paul since the very beginning, and I hope you guys can join him on the ride. So stay tuned. Take care.